And what I didn't realize is to switch from, if I'm using the same processor for a cognitively demanding task like masking, and I'm using it for something novel, I can't do both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so my mask was dropping.
Have you ever been told at work you're unlikable? For me, that feedback can set me off into a deep spiral, examining a full reflection of my entire being, while still holding on to the masking I do every day. Hi, I'm Brett, the AuDHD boss, and on this channel we talk about ADHD and autism in the workplace. I have a formal diagnosis of autism and ADHD, AuDHD, and I have 12 years of leadership training and management experience. Today, Dr. Bowen Marshall and I are talking about warm cues and what they have to do with masking. We also get into where the term masking historically comes from and the overlap between a queer identity and neurodivergence, and why for many of us those two things are completely inseparable, and what happens to your brain when the masking starts to drop. Dr. Bowen Marshall, PhD, is a licensed psychotherapist, author, and career coach specializing in ADHD, autism, and neurodivergent career development. As a part of his work, he helps neurodivergents navigate the complexity of career demands, helping ADHD'ers, AuDHD'ers, and Autistics find and create systems, workflows, and leadership styles that help them succeed and thrive at work and life. I started our conversation with something that my therapist said to me after I was experiencing a couple of really hard executive function days that actually sort of reframed our conversation and my inner voice. On Monday and Tuesday, I felt like the world was against me. And then when I had therapy on Wednesday, my therapist said, or your executive function is just really, really bad this week because you had one thing that really made your executive function harder, and then you were already stressed because of that, and then another harder executive function thing happened, and then they were doing construction on my street, and the noise of it was just increasingly overwhelming to me, so I couldn't regulate in any capacity. And so she was saying, you're just getting more and more and more and more. Like you're not getting to that point where you can like get back to regulation. So I was like, yeah, that's more logical than the world is against me.
Well, but let's talk about that, because that's the feedback that we wanted to talk about today. When a person with autism or ADHD gets told, you're not likable, or they come to us in a coaching capacity and they go, the world just doesn't like me. Talk to me about how you think of your executive functioning and how that shows up in terms of your ability to do things, how many mistakes you make, and actually show up and be present with people.
For me, it's always been, I'm stupid. I can't do this thing. This thing is hard for me. And then it's just terrible negative self-talk. You know, the thing we always say, I would never say this to a friend. If a friend was saying this to themselves, I would say, knock it off. You know, that's not who you are. But yet you get stuck in that pattern. And then as soon as that rumination begins, you can't get out of it to find a solution or a strategy to get through that thing that's driving your executive function. And now it just feels like I'm defeated, and it's hard to come back from that.
One of the things I didn't realize, and I think this starts with executive function, is, and I got a little heat over this because I made an equation across the autism spectrum, and I want to be very clear that I'm talking about level 1 support autism, people who are late diagnosed, who are automatically masking in their eyes, but they're actually using different parts of the brain. So there's this study out of China where they had high trait autism and low trait autism participants. I don't know what the nature of how able you are to get official diagnoses in China. I just don't know.
Yeah.
But the study was small, but it was interesting because they did like an fMRI imagery of what parts of the brain people with high autistic traits were using to communicate socially, interpersonally, and people with low autistic traits. And they actually found that high autistic trait individuals preferred talking to other high autistic trait individuals, and low autistic trait individuals preferred talking to other low autistic trait individuals. And for me, that really starts to get into the double empathy problem, that if we're functionally using different parts of the brain, maybe that's part of what the cue is. And they were saying that that autistics overwhelmingly in the study used frontal lobe processing, and non-autistics used this temporal parietal junction, which is more automatic. You're not really thinking about it. And for me, that suddenly made sense because when I worked for a university and when I worked for a consulting firm, I would, if something's in my wheelhouse, I can emote.
Yep.
I've got the 2 tracks playing side by side. I used to teach a course. People are like, oh, this instructor is so charismatic. They're so outgoing. And then I would be in a meeting and I would have to switch to like a novel task of like, put these 150 students on these different buses based on dietary restrictions. And people would instantly say, are you mad?
Yeah. Yep.
Did something happen? Why do you look so frustrated? And I was like, what are you talking about?
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize is to switch from, if I'm using the same processor for a cognitively demanding task like masking, and I'm using it for something novel, I can't do both at the same time.
Yeah.
And so my mask was dropping. And what I realized is, maybe the thing is, if you're neurotypical, or at least not autistic, because you have two processors, it's like your face goes on autopilot while your frontal brain is doing this. And I think for me, when we talk about the world being against us, if you want to know how to do something that a neurotypical does, ask an autistic person.
Yeah.
Because we've been having to try to figure out. It's like calculus, right?
Yeah.
It's like estimating the curve of a sphere. Our rectangles can get smaller and smaller and smaller, but we're never going to hit that sphere because we can't use that part of our brain.
Yeah.
And I think for me, that's one of the surest manifestations of my executive overload is how frequently does that mask drop?
To sort of oversimplify what you just said a little bit is if I'm outside of the scope of my special interest, I can't the joy and the relaxation of being in my special interest allows me to unmask. I literally feel the tension leave my body and I can be more myself. There's always a little bit of masking there, but I can at least let it go a lot more. The second I have to switch gears, I literally feel the tension return. Now that I'm aware of what masking is, I feel it in my body reactivate, and I can relate to that too. I can think of all the meetings I had to be in that I would go in, frankly, going, I don't want to be here. I don't want to have this conversation. This is a complete waste of my time. I could be going doing my special interest, but I got to sit through this thing. And then I'm exhausted from having to like pull all those things together in ways that I don't have an expertise in, I don't have knowledge, and I don't have excitement for. And my face just drops at that exact second. And
I find right when I can drop my mask, I'm emoting. I'm just not doing the nice, pleasant emoting, right?
Yes.
And I just wrote an article on how we don't know what we call autism, at least in the United States, is really white male autism because it's so reliant on masking.
Yeah.
And masking is a result of high compliance white supremacy culture, right? Like you got to wear a specific dress shirt, right? We're both wearing button downs because we're perceived better that way.
Yeah.
And that in autism and ADHD, that's the opposite of conformity. It's being authentic, it's being transparent, it's having to sit with really uncomfortable feelings in yourself and other people and deal with that. And I think I actually don't know if non-white normative people dislike autistics as much as white people, because I don't know, in some cultures it doesn't seem like we're compelled to mask as much.
I'm going to shout out to your article because I think you're underselling it. It was an incredibly good article.
Yeah, the reason I said yes, even masking is caused by racism, is because I was working with a fellow clinician who's new to diagnosing autism, adult autism, and they were assessing this black person, and they said, oh, well, they can't have autism, they're too expressive. And I was like, oh, okay. And I explained it to them, but I thought, gosh, that's how deep it goes, right? Because autism originally, around the 1910s, 1920s is when I think they were really starting to define what it was. And then very quickly, because the Germans learned the eugenics movement from California, right? So the American and German eugenics movements are intertwined. And during World War II, Asperger, the doctor that was trying to understand what Asperger's was, actually wasn't trying to save anybody on the spectrum. He was trying to say, oh, it looks like there's what we're now finding out genetically, childhood presenting autism, and then there's later diagnosed presenting autism. Let's find the entire spectrum so we can kill them all. And I think, that in tandem with the ugly laws of the United States, forced sterilization, when you look at deviance as the thing that white supremacy culture is trying to expunge, that's why queer masking feels the same as white passing, feels the same as neurotypical masking, because they're all ways that people are trying to survive, being called out and therefore maybe put away and therefore maybe sterilized and therefore maybe killed.
Specifically, queer masking for me is just safety. Inherently knowing, I have to act more straight now in order to survive, or just to just not be seen, called out, or named, or made fun of even.
Talk to me about your piece on connecting bisexuality.
For me, it's a through line of coming out and understanding masking. So I came out late in my 30s, and I literally didn't have an understanding or a comprehension of the concept of bisexuality until I was in my 30s. It's embarrassing to say that. The way I was raised, I had no access to that information, and I had no understanding. And then anywhere we came close to that understanding because of a high control religion upbringing, as soon as anything like that came up, I was sort of pulled away from that, or told it was wrong, or you can't be around that, or that sort of thing. And there were just so many defense mechanisms because, again, you're told as you're being raised in this culture, these are the rules. These are the rules you have to follow. If you don't follow these rules, you are in trouble, and there's something wrong with you. And if you step out of line, you're going to be punished for that in some capacity, big or small. There's just that internalized, inherent fear that, oh my God, I'm going to get in trouble, or I'm going to get caught, or I'm going to get found out, or they're going to punish me of some kind. And once that's baked in at such a young age, it's harder to break out of that, to have an understanding of a concept that you've been told your whole life is wrong or bad. How are you going to accept now that that's not wrong or bad? All the people that were telling you that had no clue what they were talking about. But then you have to let your mask down long enough to accept it's okay, to accept yourself, and to accept the people that told you all that were wrong.
I'm really sitting with that because it's something like 30 to 70% of neurodivergent people. And again, these are broad estimates because we don't ask, and under penalty of punishment, people don't want to answer these questions, right? But 30 to 70% of neurodivergent people are queer in some way, right? And so the twin struggles, when people started to ask me, oh, well, can you talk about like being non-binary and autistic as separate things? And I was like, they're one and the same.
They are one and the same, yeah.
Like being outside of something that is so expected, not quite understanding. I always said that being non-binary for me, I know I'm sitting with another non-binary person, I was always trying to aim for masculinity, but they always came into the left of it.
Yeah.
And I couldn't understand, like when I started wearing sun hats, I was like, sun hats are great. Why is everyone not wearing a sun hat?
Yeah.
I'm sitting in the pool with all these gay men, and they're like, your sun hat's stinging me in the face. And I'm like, well, but we would have more space. And we wouldn't get sun cancer. And then when I started carrying purses, I was like, I think purses are going to be the item of the summer. No one else wore purses. And so I think that being outside is something. Same with, autism. It's like, I feel like I cognitively understand you, but I'm always just to the left of like being included in whatever it is that you're doing.
Yeah.
Well, and hearing you say, I came out so late, that, of course you did.
Yeah.
Because as I was writing this article, I start in one place and then inevitably I discover things. And I always thought that ABA sounded like bullshit, like it just sounded like torture. But I didn't go back into the original documents to read like what O. Lovaas actually wrote. And I always want to be accurate. Like, did they start reparative therapy or conversion therapy? And realizing didn't start with sexuality, but did try to do some stuff with transgender people or people. Mm-hmm. And I read his article, Behavioral Treatment of Deviant Sex Role Behaviors in Male Child. Mm-hmm. At one point, so they talk about what they did in the clinic, how they trained the mom, how they trained the dad to try and get to punish and extinguish behaviors. And there's a point at which they put all of these toys in this room. They put the mom there, and they put like dolls, and they put trucks, and they put building blocks. And when he went up to the dolls and started playing with it, the mom was trained to pick up a book and show disinterest. And he would start screaming.
Yeah.
Because at first, he was trying to get her attention, showing him what he was playing with. And I just started crying while I was reading it, because I was like, that is the worst kind of torture you can is to
Seriously.
withdraw love.
Yeah.
To say, you are not worthy based on something that genuinely moves you, that's not hurting anyone else.
Yeah.
I'm going to withdraw love. And then to add to it, at home, they train them to do the same thing and also to spank him.
Yeah.
And so I actually thought I would have to do more work to show the link between masking and white supremacy, but it was a pretty short board.
It's a short distance.
And the reason I wander from there to this is because that's what professional dress code is, right? That's what no tattoos, no stimming. It's all based on that same high compliance white supremacy culture. We want to put all these things in the environment that show whether you belong or not. Mm-hmm. And one thing I think we both talked about is I've been getting a lot more coaching clients who say they just tell me I'm unlikable. I'm producing good product, but someone had a negative interaction with me and started talking to other people, and all of a sudden I'm told that I don't communicate well, that I'm difficult to work with. Also, I have a couple clients identified as a woman, and so there's so much gender bias going on here, right? Assertive, domineering, right? Like all the things that we would praise in a man who's like very certain of what they're doing because this is their person's content expertise, right?
Yeah.
Was being thrown back at this person. And I'm wondering, like, what are you seeing in your clients who are coming to you for coaching and being told you're not likable, or you need to be more likable, or you need to work on your interpersonal skills?
Well, it's definitely something that comes up regularly because a lot of people, and again, mostly women, are presenting this more, but I am getting this with my non-binary clients as well, that it's feeling like as soon as they hear something like that, they go, okay, there's no path to promotion. There's no, once that label has been made, how do I'm going to mix my metaphors here. How do I unring that bell? Because how am I going to get this person to see me in a different way? And the difficulty there is the advice, I can help you. And if we had to use a masking strategy where we have to hide those parts of ourselves, we can strategize that together. But I don't want to ethically tell you that because that feels like bad advice. At the same time, in the work structure that you're in, I don't know how to work around that to change that person's perception of you without that person exiting the company, without you having a mentor or a sponsor that can help advocate for you to get you out of that, or for you to exit the company. Now, there's ways around it. You can have a major win. You could have some huge win in a project or some event or something where you wow them so much that you start to build back goodwill. But I personally have seen very senior leaders come in with preconceived notions that can get stuck for years around the leadership table, even though that person has performed well, has worked very hard, has shown what an amazing employee they are, has shown how good they are, all these different things. It just takes one person in the room to say the wrong thing and say, well, that thing they did 5 or 6 years ago. It's like, that's 5 or 6 years ago. Like, unless there's enough people in the table that can say, you need to let that go and hold that more senior person accountable to challenge their perception. It's very difficult to move past that.
I really sit with, we need to throw the whole Renaissance person, Renaissance man thing out the window.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
So you started this conversation by saying, right, like you were having a hard executive function week and your negative self-talk is to be like, I'm stupid, I'm wrong. And something I came across recently is this idea of a spiky cognitive profile. Mm-hmm. That all people have spiky cognitive profiles. They have things that they're really good at and things they're not really good at. But in the autistic brain, it's like that on steroids, right? So I'm a pretty great writer, to be honest. But we are in the process of getting a house ready to sell or rent, and part of that is sanding the walls and painting. My husband will not let me paint because he says even when it's the same color and the same brush, it's 3 different colors because I can't do a consistent brush stroke.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, I got you. And he's like, it doesn't help me, Bowen, because you're so bad at it. And I'm like, and it's between the ADHD and the autism and the lack, the boredom. I'm terrible.
Yeah.
I would rather get crucified for an article I wrote that was bad sometimes than try and paint the wall.
Yeah.
And so what I sit with is, you don't get my great writing skills without getting my terrible painting skills.
Yeah.
And that's what I really help people to think about. Like, what are the strength sides and shadow sides? You don't get the insight, brilliance, connective ways that an autistic person brings their special interest to a business.
Yeah.
And not also get the shadow sides.
Absolutely. It's critical. And I honestly, that's for the years that I was a manager, the 12 years that I was a senior leader, that was the focal point of my management style was, okay. And it got better once I understood autism and ADHD. When I understood the concepts of it, it just strengthened us. But it was like, we promote our strengths. We look for I want to draw out your strengths. I want to draw out your special interests. I want to draw out all those things that you love to do. The more you want to do that stuff, I want to know what your superpower is. I want to know what the superpower is you don't tell anybody about. And I want to know all of those things you don't like doing. Because guess what? That thing you don't like doing, somebody over there is going to love doing that thing. And they're going to hate doing that thing that you love doing. Put the two of you together, you're going to be an unstoppable team. And that's how I would build out my teams, is I would listen in interviews for people's special interests, what they'd like to do, knowing full well the rest of my team and the things that they hated. We would write job descriptions around the things that my team hated to do, so that I was putting up signals for the things that I wanted to catch in my interview process for special interest for people that come in and I only want to do this thing. Fantastic. You're going to fit in great on this team, because none of these people want to do that. And that's where the strength of having a strong neurodivergent or not, because if we can build that up and you can accept, if you're neurotypical and you can accept this work style from the rest of the neurodivergent team, then we're still going to get along. And if there's a thing that you're like, well, I'm not good at that, but I'm willing to learn. Okay, I will always work with that, because we do the training, we do the thing. And if we find out you're still not interested in it and you're not really good at it, that's okay. We're going to focus on the thing that you're amazing at.
Well, the thing I always go to is the single greatest predictor of success in leadership is emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
And the single greatest predictor in long-term relationships is each individual partner's individual emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
All right, emotional intelligence is 5 factors: self-awareness, self-control, social awareness, social skill, and motivation to work on all 5, on those 4 things, right? And what you're talking about is good management, right? I think what so often happens is managers think they're supposed to define a process and then just force plug people into that process.
Yeah, you're always going to hit barriers.
And as opposed to realizing, no, you have to have a process and a people, and you have to more like genomically match which person's going to do well. And that's what makes a good manager. That's how you get exponential output, because you have people specializing in the things that they're good at, that their brains actually work well with.
Yeah.
So that they're able to thrive and not constantly be working against. I think bad management is constantly working against your neurotype. Constantly,
all the time. Yes. But this is a part of the emotional intelligence of good management. Get out of the way. Get out of the way. Like, you've built this team of people who know what they're doing. They're good at their jobs. You've hired them to do this job. Stop getting in the way.
When I hear when someone says they're unlikable, I think, okay, well, let's step back from, are you unlikable because you're trying to, wrong people, right? And I always go back to the Vanessa Van Edwards statistic, where, based on her research, 82% of first impressions are determined by 2 things: warmth and competence. Warmth. Am I friendly? Can you trust me? Am I not going to hurt you? Competence. Am I going to do what I say I'm going to do? Am I going to be able to follow through on the things that I promise you? And what I find for a lot of my autistic clients is they're very high competence people. And when all you do is project competence, the people who work with you have to fill in the story about what's underneath there. Because you can be competent and helpful.
Yeah.
You can be competent and just trying to skate by, or you can be competent and I'm going to come for you with my competence.
Yeah.
And so I always say, you're going to have the 20% of people who work with you enough or have good experiences with competent people. They're like, yeah, your fault. You don't have to, start with a warm greeting and with a warm salutation, right? Then you have the 20% of the people that are out to get you and will never like you no matter what. But then you have this middle 60% of people who are waiting to see, right? They need the warmth so that they can start to build trust.
Yes, exactly.
And so when people say, oh, I don't have time to do that, I don't want to do that, I say, well, you may not have time, but what I'm trying to help you do is understand, okay, you already got 20 in your pocket.
Yeah.
If you start being warm, that's actually going to help you differentiate this middle 60% from this bottom 20%. So it's actually going to reduce your noise signal so you can actually see who is coming for you.
Yeah.
Because if you say something like, I hope you had a good day, I hope how was your kid's soccer game? Again, Vanessa Van Edwards, Captivate, but they actually did a study of popular kids to see what makes them popular.
Yeah.
And it was micro moments of liking.
Yep.
They liked the most people. And they just said, I like your backpack. How was your game yesterday? You can do that at the office.
Yeah.
You can walk around, and I used to do that as a rule. I would walk around and just say hi to people, ask one thing, because I had to work across multiple departments to deliver educational products. So I had to go to analytics to get data. I had to go to finance to make sure that we were getting paid for things. I had to go to our actual content experts to pull things on, like, how do you ask for $50,000?
Yeah.
And by showing micro moments of liking, I was able to better sort, okay, who's with me and who's like, you got my job, I don't like you.
Yeah. Again, to sort of oversimplify it, there was a friend of mine who would go into work every morning, and she was always running a little late, had her head down, was like in her head about something that they were going to do in the workday that day. And there was an older, closer to retirement aged colleague who said good morning to everybody as they came in for the workday. Literally said good morning to every single person. And my friend was the only one that wouldn't respond back with good morning. She would just keep her head down, just maybe grunt a little bit, but was always stressed because she was running late. And so the more elder person in the role started talking smack about my friend because the one and only thing, she wouldn't respond with a simple good morning back every single morning when she walked in. She just didn't say good morning back. That's it. That's all it was. Because the other employees started to press her, like, why don't you like her? She's wonderful. She's amazing. She's incredible at her job. And like 10 minutes later, she'd come back warm and bubbly and happy to greet everybody and start that she just needed to settle into her workday to get settled. And she's like, oh, she just doesn't say good morning every morning. Okay, so just say good morning and the problem goes away, which isn't fair to my friend who shouldn't have to do that. But yet, at the same time, it's going to reduce, she has the control to reduce that narrative, even though she shouldn't have to do that. Yeah, that friction,
Yeah. And I think, right, it's also primacy and recency effects, right?
Yeah.
So, like, it's do you start off well and do you end well? And people kind of forget the middle. And by the way, as an autistic person, I'm looking for warmth cues too.
Yeah.
I think that's what sometimes we get on this maybe like us versus them. No, sometimes it's us versus us.
Yeah.
Because we don't know too. I like very explicit signaling. I appreciate it because it reduces the ambiguity. And it also tells me when people don't explicitly signal to me, either maybe there's some neurodivergent there or maybe they're trying to hide something.
Yeah.
Right? I always think, like, if you're not being clear with me, why? Right? White supremacy culture. It's one of the only cultures where you're nice to people's face that you don't like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being around some of my other friends, like, they will just tell you. They'll be like, nope, I don't like you, go away. And you're like, well, at least I know, right?
Yeah.
But I think the other piece that I always think from relationship counseling and also first impression stuff, Robert Childan wrote a great few books on influence, that it's 7-to-1. In relationships, 7 positive interactions to balance out 1 negative interaction. If you make a bad first impression, it takes 7 iterations of winning them back because that first impression is so strong. And so what I tell people to alleviate the pressure is, I'm not trying to make you likable. That's beyond your control. Whether they like you or not is not your business, actually. But you can find your particular type of warmth. But I think, right, even being aware of it, I have warmth cues. One thing is people like to see your palms. They like to see you're not holding anything. So even on virtual things, I always greet my clients by doing this.
Yeah.
They look like doing Barney jazz hands, but they work, right? And then when I say goodbye, I always make sure I have a friendly open palm, right? When I'm listening, because eye contact too much eye contact is a sign of aggression, right? So
Yeah.
whoever said that, whatever, but it's like as long as it's a maybe 30 to 70%, and as long as you look at the end of a sentence or you look at the end of their sentence, they know you're paying attention, right?
Yeah.
I love to do like a head tilt, like to let you know that I'm really noticing. One, now that my hair is longer, it kind of covers my face going flat.
Mm-hmm.
So I was talking with a guy that I had never met before in England, and he said, I really like your videos. I said, oh, thank you. I was like, do you put out videos? He goes, no. And he said something, and I said, oh yeah, like I do mask heavily during those videos. And he goes, oh, I can tell.
Yeah.
And I went, okay, like, whichever. Like, I was like, wow, there's some shame there. It's like, if I'm going to mask, I'm the best masker. No one's going to tell. But then you realize, oh no, autistic people who are looking for it.
We all know.
You're just like, okay. So who you're doing it for are those people who like have not yet figured out what masking is, who are autistic.
Yeah.
And it does make them feel more comfortable because they're doing it automatically. And I also think neurotypical people who are just looking for that sign of friendliness. So it's interesting. I feel like I'm not performing as much for the self-aware, unmasked or masked autistic person. It's usually people who are kind of coming over to the island.
Yeah.
I think also when we talk about finding our particular type of warmth, it's like, okay, what if I'm sitting across from you?
Mm-hmm.
What would you want me to do for you to make you feel like I was friendly and safe?
Yeah. Well, and I think honestly, that's the problem that I have is I'm reprogramming for every person that I'm being warm for. And that's not healthy. It's not, because you're extra masking for each. So if I know, I have to be warm in this pattern for this person versus warm for this person in this way, especially if that person in the workplace has more power or has a more senior position, or I know has a different reactionary style or tone. I mean, let's really get into it, Bowen. I mean, I can measure that out depending on how much power you have in the workplace versus how that impacts me versus how much it doesn't impact me. Okay, this person's more senior to me. They hold more power in the organization. I'm going to be warm in a very different way to that person than I am this person over here who maybe we're on equal footing. Their actions don't necessarily negatively impact the decisions that I make, but I need to be a good colleague and collaborate with them. So I'm going to be probably a little bit more warm with them because we have a more collegial relationship. But it's going to get colder the more I'm more with a more senior person, depending on how much time I know I need to get in and get out with that person. A lot of us will process that, I think, in different ways.
So one of the reasons why I don't mask like that is because when you're not white, learning to mask past a certain point doesn't benefit you.
Yeah.
Because they're already like, well, like I was at one of those fancy, there are 5 or 6 restaurants and they give you the buzzer basically so they don't have to hire as many wait staff and pay people a fair wage, right? It's like, but it's like open air and it's so loud. And I was just like, it's pride. And maybe I shouldn't say this, but like I kind of had my tits out, like what you do when you're like gay, you're like, I was wearing a very, almost nip slip tank top. And it was like bright pink. And I think I had, it was like all like trans pride flags. So like I had like, blue shorts and a hat. And, I was just like, whatever.
Yeah.
Sorry, whatever. And I was loud and having a good time. And my friend goes, oh, you need to be quiet. They're going to come over and check us. And I love this woman. She is like, we worked together for years. And I said, oh no, babe, that's you and your blonde bob.
Yeah.
And she goes, huh? And I said, I love your hair. You moisturize it immaculately. Like, this is not a read, but like, look at the room. I am half Asian, but often get interpreted as Latino. There are 3 other people who look Latino-esque in here. 2 of them are behind the bar. There is a black woman over there, and there are 150 white people.
Yeah.
I said, this space wasn't built for me.
Yeah.
Like, sometimes I walk in these places, I'm like, are they even going to let me in the door? Or are they going to like give me their trash? And so when you realize that like there's already a ceiling to how much like fitting in better is going to get you,
you
just stop at some point. It's like, well, and I think that's what I try and teach my clients is you've been sold this myth that the better you mask, the more you personalize masking, it's going to be better for you. But actually, it just gets read as inauthentic.
Yeah.
Because someone sees your mask at that person, and that person, they're like, oh, this person's duplicitous.
Mm-hmm.
So I say, like, if you can, think about like masking 80% of the way and stop. And I just lucked into it because I experienced systemic racism as a person of color. So I'm like, and I always want to give shout outs to like when it is an advantage, because I just never had to carry that. I just never had to carry that.
Yeah.
Masking is trying to get us to disconnect from ourselves.
Yeah.
Because when neurodivergent people, when queer people disconnect from ourselves, we lose our power.
Absolutely.
I remember when I was in graduate school around a bunch of neurodivergent people before we knew we were all neurodivergent, and they would just say that, like, you were just so free.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't feel free at all. But I realized, oh, they were all white people.
Yeah.
And I love them. I still love them. We still, get together and, talk about career and things. But that's the other part of that, article that didn't get in it, but I was thinking about it is, white people so often don't get to experience joy.
Mm-hmm.
And in the article, I referenced the creator. I can't remember the name off the top of my head, but she is amazing. I think she's like a sociologist or something on TikTok. But she talks about how compliance is not joy.
Yeah, it's not.
But compliance does protect you from systemic violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so you trade safety for freedom, safety for joy. And it stinks. We focus so much on people who are neurodivergent, autistic, who are trying to survive a workplace, but to managers.
Yeah.
I think one of the questions you should ask is, do I not like this person because they're being unkind to me, because they're in some way they've been duplicitous to me, because they've been untruthful, or do I not like this person because maybe they're autistic?
Yeah. And a lot of times it's just, I don't like that person's working style, but I'm referencing it as them. Okay, well, if their working style doesn't complement your working style, we can fix that. We can address that. We can find a workaround. We can find different work styles, work patterns, different communication styles. That's different from just not liking the person. To just, I get frustrated when somebody says something to you, I just don't like you. It's just so frustrating. It's like, well, hold on now. That's your responsibility to fix that then. That's not my responsibility to fix myself for you. You have to sit with that and figure out, this is your problem. You need to work through that. We can have things that we dislike about, we may not have the same interest in everything, but to just say, oh, I don't like you and walk away, it's just like, well, you need to work on that then. That's your problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's, not to equate it with substance use, but I think it's a really useful piece. One of the mantras in AA is, I'm not responsible for other people's opinions of me.
Yeah.
And I really like what you said there is it's not my responsibility to get you to like me or not like me. It's my responsibility to show up and say, I'm not going to hurt you.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do.
Yeah.
If 95% of the people that encounter me say, yep, he's friendly and they're trustworthy, and you are an exception to that rule, that's a you thing, not a me thing. Because
exactly.
I am constantly checking to make sure that I'm, on general, doing those things.
Yeah.
And that's why I really like the, are you aware of warmth and what that means for you? Are you aware of competence and what that means for you? And are you consistent in that framework? Because when you're constantly chasing another person's opinion, you have no idea what their background is.
No.
You have no idea what the instrument's been normed on, but you know what your instrument is.
Yeah. And you lose yourself. You lose your authenticity. You lose your intentions. You lose everything that makes you special and you when you're so busy chasing down that stuff. My thanks to Dr. Bowen Marshall for his time today. Again, we have really enjoyed these conversations in our series. I've actually created a playlist now on my channel where you can see all of our conversations and little snippets of our conversations as well. So for more information, check that out in my description. Make sure you're following Bowen's YouTube channel, Instagram, TikTok, and of course their Substack. In the article that they mentioned about masking and Substack, you can catch a link to that in the description below. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe and check out some of the other videos while you're here. If you're interested in coaching or workplace development or more neuro-inclusive workplace support, be sure to reach out to me for more information on that, or you can check out my website, my Substack, or again, the description below. Thanks for watching.